Hi, welcome to the video on OOT clauses. You'll note that OOT clauses can do a lot of different things, so we're going to hit three big ones, three big things that they can do today, and we'll leave the other two to another day, perhaps in Latin 3 in the first quarter, but for now we're going to hit the ones we have to know in Latin 2 honors. And I think that you'll find these things not to be too hard once you get the hang of them, because they all have pretty definite clues. As we read with expectations and as we read linearly, we should be able to say, okay, I expect something to be the case, and you'll find that it's there. So it'll actually follow the rules for the most part in context, and that'll be good news. Anyway, you'll find that sometimes these are adverbial clauses, sometimes they are noun clauses. In other words, they take the place of a noun. For instance, you'll find that a purpose clause is a very adverbial clause, which is the first one we'll learn, and then the indirect command actually ends up taking the place of a noun. It takes the place of a direct object if you're ordering something of a sentence. So we'll get to that, but those two things, even though they have different functions, they are going to be structured very similarly. And so you have to look at context around, and that's the big key. Also important to note before we move on to the three clauses and the examples for them is that this is going to be using the subjunctive a lot like the indicative. You're going to translate these clauses with indicative verbs, even though the verb in the Latin will be subjunctive. And that's because in English, we don't use our subjunctive very often. We like to use would, should, could for some of them. We use may or might. We use let. And for these contexts that the Romans used the subjunctive in, we do not use in our language. So it actually makes it kind of easy because we don't have to even worry about the fact that the verb is subjunctive so much in an OOT clause. Also important to point out before we get to the subjunctive OOT clause is that in context you can have OOT with the indicative, and that is simply as. So it's important before we learn all of these clauses, you're going to be making a lot of OOT clause decisions in the next 2 years. If it has an indicative, it's simply as, and that can be either a comparison, so like just as a be or something like velut, just as, or it can be as like a temporal, like as I was walking, something happened. So this is important to keep in mind because unless you have a subjunctive, you don't need to then look for other clues and everything. If you just have an OOT with an indicative, it's simply the word as and you move on. Okay, so this is what I want to point out first, is that you shouldn't make anything confusing unless it actually is. So your first question with all of these things should be, do we have a subjunctive or an indicative? So that's, I guess, step one for all the OOT clauses is, do you have a subjunctive or an indicative? Now, moving forward here, I'm going to assume we have a subjunctive for the next three slides. But again, I just want to point out that if we have the indicative, it's as. Okay? I don't want you to assume that all OOT clauses are going to be a decision-making process if they don't have to be. So let's move on. The first one with the subjunctive, the purpose clause, is going to give us the reason an action happens. So if I say I went to the store in order to get cabbage, for instance, obviously the reason I went to the store was to get cabbage. And so that clause, in order to get cabbage, modifies the I went to the store clause. And so it's simply a reason for something happens. In kind of our translation language, you're going to translate as in order that. So in English, it would sound like I went to the store in order that I get cabbage. It's going to be kind of one of the easier ones. It's kind of like your ablative of means of OOT clauses, in that usually you can fall back on it, or dative of reference. You can kind of fall back on it as kind of a very basic and easy one. So the cool thing about OOT clauses in general that is important to note immediately is that if they need to be negated, so if you want to say in order that I don't do something, or if in order something not happen, you actually don't use ut, you use nay, with the exception of the next slide will be the result clause, but we'll get to that when we get to it. But if you're going to say like in order that something not happen, you use nay, and it has the same exact meaning and weight as ut. It just is like ut with a negative in it. And so that's the first thing you'll notice. And you'll get an example of a nay clause in the second sentence there in the examples. And you'll notice they have subjunctive verbs. And I want to point it out here, it translates like a normal indicative. In other words, you don't need to do any crazy would, should, could, may, might, let stuff. When doing these things, you can kind of just translate it as is. And you'll see it in the examples down there when I say it. Hopefully you'll be able to follow that just fine. And the thing about the purpose clause is that all the other ut clauses will have some kind of clue that it's that clause. The purpose clause is the one where it just doesn't have any clues. So if you're like, I don't have a bossy verb, I don't have a trigger word, I don't have a fear word, I don't have a happening verb, it's probably a purpose clause. And that's just fine. It's just one of those ones where it's like the basic ut clause without any other clues. And so let's do a little bit of translating here. Caesarem dictatorem, Brutus nobilibus, gladio, interfecit, ut, nice bracket there, res publica servaretur, bracket. Okay. The servaretur, you'll notice, is the imperfect subjunctive with the infinitive are with a tour ending there. We get most noble Brutus. Let's see if I can type this out as I record. Most noble Brutus killed Caesar the dictator with a sword in order that the republic be saved. Very cool. All right. So you'll notice there is a little bit of a subjunctive-y sound to our English, in order that the republic be saved. I wouldn't mark you down if you said in order that the republic is saved, or was saved, or something like that. It just doesn't sound right. With a purpose, you almost want to use that be in a very weird way that you wouldn't use in a normal clause. You wouldn't say the republic be saved as a main sentence, but you can say in order that the republic be saved. That's actually a remnant of the English subjunctive actually happening without adding a would, should, could, may, might, let, or whatever. And I think we should keep it. So if you can kind of like make your English make sense using that kind of language, I encourage you to. But if you're uncomfortable with it, I'll probably mark it correct if you put in order the republic is saved or was saved or something like that. The is saved actually would be like more present, so it was saved. But I like the be there. Anyway, so that's the first example. As you saw, I followed all the rules that I just laid out for you for purpose clause. So we'll go to the second one down here. We get in Catalinam, multa graviore, ne. Remember, ne and ut are almost the same thing. Res publica verti posit, a nice little clause there. Cicero publicae dicebat. So here we have Cicero. Let me see if I can type this out for you. Cicero publicly spoke many very serious things against Catiline. All right, and this is where we need to interpret our nay clause. So we have in order that, because we have a purpose clause. We have our subject res publica, the republic, be able. Nice be there again with that passive or the verb to be. It just seems to click. I like it. In order that the republic be able or not be able, I'm sorry, we have a nay, not be able to be destroyed, literally overturned, but we'll go with destroyed. I apologize, I'm not great at typing. Anyway, Cicero publicly spoke many very serious things against Catiline in order that the Republic not be able to be destroyed. You notice the nay in there. It's still in order that. You just put a not with the post. And I even forgot to do it at first. So I just had to insert the not there when it was time. And so that's kind of the gist of the purpose clause. It's not too complicated. You're going to just be kind of saying there's no other clues other than a subjunctive verb. And you do in order that. And that's kind of it. So we'll move on and you'll see what the other ones entail that actually have clues. And those clues will tell us it's a different kind of clause. And as we begin the next kind of clause, the result clause, you're going to notice immediately as you start reading through the notes that you don't have ut and ne, you have ut and ut non. This is the only ut clause that takes a subjunctive that is ut non instead of ne. So it's a very interesting one there, which is actually cool because since it's the only one, if you have an ut non and a subjunctive, you know it's a result clause. That's like a clue that you can say definitely result clause right there. So I guess I would say that's clue number one. Clue number two, there's a list of them on the right side of the screen, so you can see those, but we'll get there in a second. There's a subjunctive verb just like in the purpose clause. Translate like an indicative verb a lot of times. Again, if you want to like put like a be in there, like I did in the last slide, that's also acceptable, but it translates largely like an indicative verb. You don't use like the would, should, could, let, may, might, let, whatever. So anyway, the cool thing about the result clause is that it has an external trigger word. So essentially what you're doing in a result clause is you're describing the result of a quality or quantity of something, or maybe like how often something happens. But so if something is so large that it can't fit, the result of its magnitude is that it can't fit into a space. And so what you're getting here are a lot of so and such words. And you'll see on the right side of the screen, you get so great, so many, in such a way, so, such, of such a kind, so, such, and so. So those are the words in English that are going to trigger these things, because you can put a that after the word. You can say it is so great that, it is such that, it happens so often that. And so your so that or such that is going to be your translation. That's kind of that last point there. And it's hard to explain these more without seeing them in context. So what I'm going to do is show you two examples, and hopefully that kind of clears up what's going on. But you'll note that these words right here, these trigger words over here, are going to be external to the ut clause. They're going to be not in the ut clause, but in the clause that the ut clause modifies. All right. So let's get started here with Caesarem dictatorem. That's going to be your direct object. Brutus nobilissimus as your subject. Interficits the verb. Tot vulneribus. We have an ablative here, and you'll see tot, and you see tot as this guy right here, so many. You'll note one thing about tot that you should remember is that it doesn't need to modify something like with an ending. It's simply plural. And it'll just go with any nearby plural. So vulneribus is a thing for it to modify. It is indeed an adjective. I don't want you to think it's not, but it just doesn't have to conform to case rules. It's always going to appear as tot. It just goes with a nearby plural. So with so many wounds. And then your ut clause, you get Antonius, the subject. Omnia is going to be a do, is that neuter plural. Ante populo, infinitive, possent, the verb, and then you end your ut clause there. You'll see possent is the infinitive plus ending. Posse is your infinitive. Enti is your ending. So you have an imperfect subjunctive. Anyway, in the first sentence, we can type down here. Most noble Brutus killed Caesar with so many wounds that Antonius was not able to count all of them in front of the people. This sentence is referring to the famous speech by Mark Antony where he kind of grabs the toga of the dead body of Brutus and starts counting the holes. He obviously wasn't able to count all of the holes. There were too many. He, of course, said, like, this one, the treacherous Brutus, his most loved Brutus struck, or whatever Shakespeare said, something like that. Anyway, so you'll note that the result of the amount of wounds, this is kind of the explanation of what a result clause is doing. The result of the amount of wounds is that is the inability to count. So the amount of wounds leads us to Antonius not being able to count them. If there are only two, he'd probably be able to count them. Since there are a whole bunch, he can't. And so you'll also notice the ut and the non there. That gives it away as a result clause as well. So there's two hints that tell you this is a result clause. It is the word tot, which is one of the trigger words up there, and then the ut non up down in the sentence here in the ut clause. So those are two clues to know it's a result clause. And again, I hope that you kind of see how the result of the description of something is a different action. Okay, so we go to the next example down here. It's getting kind of messy, I'm sorry. So we see Tom. We remember Tom up here, sorry, is going to be this one right here, so. It's an adjective. It takes an adjective. So the cool thing about Tom is that it takes another adjective. It just can't take magnos because that would be tantos, so great. So here we have so serious, such serious words. And then that, of course, goes with verba. A cicerone consule, I'll zoom out, I'm sorry, in senatu, and then dicta sunt your verb. The ut that we expected with Tom is right there. Nemo is the subject, senatorum is a genitive. Pro Catalina is a nice preposition. We have an infinitive loqui, and ausus est comes from audeo. It's a partial deponent. In the perfect, it is deponent, so it is a verb to dare. So, such very serious words were spoken by Cicero the consul in the Senate that nobody of the senators dared to speak on behalf of Catiline. Do I have to type it out? I hope not. No, you can rewind it if you didn't get that. I'll say it one more time, though. Such very serious words were spoken by Cicero the consul in the Senate that nobody of the senators dared to speak on behalf of Catiline. So the result of the weight of his words, right, the very serious words, because of Tom, right? The result of that is that nobody wanted to speak up for Catiline because Cicero had given such dire straits with his words. So another example of how a result clause works with that Tom and the ut there. I want to point out that not all ut clauses are at the ends of sentences. It was just easier to write them that way. So I apologize if in the text you're like, oh, it's in the middle of a sentence, it cut everything off. I know. But you know, that I guess that's how things go sometimes. Anyway, I move on to the next slide, and yeah, we'll do the last one here. So the final one is an interesting one because it's actually a form of a noun clause. In other words, like it takes the place of a noun, and that's the indirect command. This is going to act as a direct object of a bossy verb, and that's how I've called them right here. You're going to need a bossy verb. To order is an easy one, but the problem with to order is, if you remember eubeo, eubeo means to order, but it always takes an ACI instead of an indirect command. It does not take an ut clause. So instead, impero, imperare, that's going to be the one that takes the ut clause, the indirect command. So just remember those two. I'm going to be very picky about those two into the future here. So, like the purpose clause, it's negated with a nay, so we're good to go there. It takes a subjunctive verb, and yeah, so it's just gonna have a subjunctive verb. It's gonna translate normally. Sometimes you're gonna use that be in there or something. And you're just going to translate it as that. There's no, like, in order that or so that. It's just that, because what's going to happen is you're going to say orders, and then you're going to say that. He orders that something happen. And so the translation is quite easy of the ut itself for the indirect command. So I gave two examples down here. I think you'll find them fairly straightforward. Both ordering verbs took a dative object in these ones, and I wanted to emphasize that to you because I guess it's kind of a theme with ordering verbs that the recipient of the order, because it's kind of a speaking word, is a dative, while the order itself is in the ut clause. And then same thing with persuading. So we'll see this first one here, Caesar imperavit, and then Caesar orders to the soldiers, or just the soldiers. So we're going to go with dative object because he orders the soldiers that something happen. Okay. And then we get the pons, trans flumen latum, and verb faceretur. Caesar ordered the soldiers that a bridge be made across the wide river. So I say again, Caesar ordered to the soldiers that the bridge be made across the wide river. Notice the be made. Let's type this one out so we can talk about the translation. All right, and you'll probably note the tense of faceretur in the English versus in the Latin. That's because this is something that kind of goes into sequence of tenses, where if you have a perfect main verb, you can't just kind of throw in a present dependent clause verb. It's just not how clauses work like that. So you have to use the imperfect to make it any kind of like present-y tense. But that's kind of a conversation for another day. But you'll note that verbs cannot be like pluperfect with orders, because you can't order that something had already happened, because you can't get in a time machine, go back and do something if somebody orders you to do it, to have done it. That doesn't seem to make sense. And so you're going to see a lot of present tense and imperfect with an indirect command. Once in a while you find it perfect as well, but not like the pluperfect. You're just probably not going to see that, just for how orders are. You can't order that somebody has already done something. Anyway, I did this one on purpose to make sure that the soldiers were not the ones doing the action, but the pons was the subject of the clause. That way you couldn't just say he ordered the soldiers to make a bridge. You'll find that you might be able to do that at certain times, but I always want you to think about what's the subject, what's the verb, what's the direct object, etc. of the ut clause, instead of just trying to put it together in English. That's why I'm going to make sure that you do it very carefully, because when you get to things like Cicero and Caesar, it's going to be important that you know what the subjects are, what the direct objects are, etc. So he ordered the soldiers that a bridge be made across the wide river. Notice the be again. We've been doing this a lot with the passive and the verb to be with to be able. It's a very nice subjunctive form, and again, you can't just it's only for dependent clauses that need a subjunctive. So you don't just go around saying the bridge be made. You can say the bridge is made. So that's kind of a neat little English thing with subjunctives. Anyway, in the second one, so that we keep this video to be not an hour long, orgeterix the subject, persuasit the verb. Persuadeo takes a dative object and an indirect command. It's kind of a double expectation. Same thing with impero, imperare. So we get the dative object with omnibus. Ne starts a clause. It looks like it goes through monoret, but we got a sed and another subjunctives. Notice the two imperfect subjunctives here and here. I did another perfect imperfect combination, which is cool. So anyway, we get in terra, we get in alteras partes, scalorum. Oops, should just extend that preposition over there. Okay, so I'll type this out for you down here. Orgeterix persuaded everyone that they not remain in the land, but that they go out into the other parts of Gaul. It literally says of the Gauls, because Caesar likes to refer to Gauls by the people that live there, and so it's often a plural like that. But I like to call it a place name. That's an English thing. So if you want to say of the Gauls, that's fine too. I'm not gonna care too much about that. But anyway, you'll notice persuade everyone that they not remain. So it doesn't have an extra like do or anything in there. It's not like that they do not remain. It's an order, so they you can get rid of the do or did or anything like that. That they not remain in the land. It's an order, so you kind of make that English subjunctive by getting rid of one of the helping verbs. It's kind of cool like that. Anyway, notice the nay turn into a not remain. But the said kind of negates the nay. Maybe we should put an oot after said, but I think the implication is there. Anyway, yeah. So this is the last of the three. Oops. How do I zoom? There we go. Okay. Cool. So. We get this set up here. We get the three oot clauses, nay clauses. If you have any questions, do rewind. I tried to run through them here. There should be plenty of stuff for you to work on since oot clauses are kind of a big deal, but we're getting close. Like a lot of the grammar at this point is pretty complex. So that means we're kind of nearing the all your basic grammar things in Latin. It's coming up here. So keep rolling. I think the next video will be on cum clauses with the subjunctive. Those are, I guess, there are fewer options for them. They're a little bit easier than oot clauses, I think. So anyway, hope you are well.